Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which remains locked in a pandemic. Doesn't feel that way all the time everywhere, but there are many reasons to keep deeply concerned about the biological, pathological environment we live in. It's a human heated planet. I've been writing for 35 years, and our guest Pete Neff is a glaciologist and climatologist who's studying this all really carefully and communicating about it. It's a planet disrupted still 1 year in by the atrocious invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin. I have more webcasts coming on that subject. This is Columbia Climate School's Sustain What, where I try to kind of navigate the turbulent world around us, both on the online and in the real world, to try to make the world a little bit better each conversation. Andy Revkin here. And today we're going to talk about TikTok, something I've been eager to talk about with some scientists, Elena Woods, another one who has dug in deep there. But I had an opportunity today to do a conversation with Pete Neff at University of Minnesota, glaciologist, climate scientist, and communicate. He's just as and a communicator, and he's just as gutsy about hanging out in Antarctic blizzards as he is about hanging out in the infodemic on that platform, which is problematic for many reasons, but also 3 or 4 billion people now are hanging out there almost every day. It's not terrain I have delved into. I have an account. I post a couple things there. I have like 50 people who see them. But I thought it'd be worth just catching you for a little bit to talk about the science, but also about what drew you to that arena. You're also on TikTok, also on Twitter and Instagram, and you teach and you do your science. So first of all, how are you, and how do you manage all of this together? Just tell us a little bit about the science part, and then we'll get into the communication part.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me. It's great to talk with you. And I guess I am recently back from Antarctica. I've been home for about a month. We had a just about 3-month deployment this season. November to January is our core science season down there. We had, you speak about the pandemic still very much being with us, and our usual risk factors in Antarctica are the weather and mechanical failures, and COVID was the ultimate factor this year that led to travel shutdowns, quarantine system for getting out to field camps. I had the pleasure of catching COVID at our research station on Christmas. It was a wild season. So, settling back into normal life. I'm a professor, a scientist, a dad. So it was my first time going to Antarctica as a dad, and first time being a dad sort of post-pandemic, going back into the world. So it's been a lot. I'm tired. Wow. I don't have a lot of energy for social media right now, but I do try to keep up the required steady pace. There's a lot going on in science and climate change, and I'm really lucky to be able to represent what a very big group of us in the ice core community do on social media, and particularly TikTok. So everything that I talk about, I want to have the caveat. It's a huge royal we that I try to represent.
Right. Can you tell me a little bit about what you see as the community of? Because we're talking mostly about TikTok. How many scientists and/or the Coldex, this project you're involved with, are really dug in there?
Dug into the science, you mean?
Into communicating it on that platform.
Well, communicating on TikTok, it would be two of us. So I have the pleasure of being the pioneer, and we had a fantastic PhD student from Scripps Institution of Oceanography, Austin Carter, shared from TikTok for the first time live from the middle of nowhere, Antarctica, and had a great reception, rapidly grew a following. I think we were chatting about it internally with our project today. He had a 82,000% growth rate in his following over the deployment in Antarctica. And it's something about the uniqueness of the content coming from Antarctica that really captures people. It gets drawn up in the TikTok algorithm. And so I've had success with that through the pandemic. Actually, I was recruited by TikTok through a talent agency. My talents are up for debate, but they snagged some of us who they saw on Instagram, and Instagram is a very visual platform, and they paid us a little bit for our time to sort of train us, give us suggestions for how to post that would be, again, taken up into the algorithm. And as the only Antarctic content producer during the pandemic, because nobody was going anywhere, I grew, quite a large following, and I was literally, sharing footage from the last time I was in Antarctica in 2018, 2019 season, right before the pandemic. And I was often creating the videos with an infant daughter sleeping on me, so it's so funny that, the perception people have of me of maybe always being in Antarctica and doing these extreme things and sharing right from there is quite the opposite. I was preparing the videos while my 6-month-old was napping on my arms. And so it was my most productive pandemic project, perhaps, besides keeping my daughter alive and safe from COVID.
Right. So actually, let's do this a little bit of a navigation here. So what was your first experience on social media, and how did that, I want to walk through this journey, which I guess had this intersection from Instagram to TikTok. But where did you start? Were you on Twitter first or Facebook or?
I was on Twitter first, and I was a pretty late adopter. So I didn't really do any social media through my PhD studies. I from Washington State, went to undergrad and did my master's at University of Washington, got into this research at that fantastic public institution. And then I hopped over to New Zealand to do my PhD. And it was when I came back to the States for my first postdoc that I was, for the first time, sort of in a smaller research group, didn't have a lot of a cohort. And so I got on Twitter to start not only sort of unloading the backlog of photos and the things that I had from past research trips, but also to engage with people. And that, I think, still is the great thing about Twitter. It's really sad to see Twitter in such a damaged state these days, but the engagement there, has led to real collaborations, and led me to start using Instagram once I sort of realized the value, the visibility, the way that you can project your view, your presence out into the world, right? It's like it's micro publishing, micro blogging. It really gives you control that obviously has become a worldwide phenomenon for good reasons, especially in places where people don't have a lot of control over the information that they receive or give.
Do you find it hard to fit it in to your academic life? Because I know, at least for young emerging researchers, postdocs and the like, it can be a challenge when they're not really rewarded. I think some universities technically are enthusiastic about your social media presence, but when it comes to getting tenure and the like, it seems to still not really count much. So has that dynamic changed?
It is changing. Your visibility on social media has been incorporated into our departmental tenure review documents. Whether or not that percolates to all the individual faculty members who review you for 10 years, another thing. But certainly, the visibility is something that employers like, universities like. It certainly gives me visibility beyond what I deserve, to be completely honest. I am not completely comfortable with it. There are jokey things like, right, in academia, we have our H index, like the number of papers that have been cited a certain number of times. And on social media, there's the K index, the Kardashian index, of how disproportionate is your social media visibility versus your actual academic credibility. And mine is definitely skewed. I hope I'm still keeping up with the science. It is honestly a bit distracting. Like, Twitter is a distraction. All of these platforms are a gamification of communication. So I do have to check myself at times, but certainly when we're in the field or when we have stuff to share from being in the field, it's very, very, it draws people in. And so you have this opportunity that you have this audience. And if you attach little pieces of the science to images or videos, you have this opportunity, especially with TikTok, as people are scrolling through just garbage, to have a sort of a sneak attack of some science. And, some people get drawn in, other people have a glancing blow and will never see it again. And any interaction has value.
Have you experienced some of the abuses that I know? There's been studies that show women, female scientists, female academics seem to get punished more than men, as do minorities, people of color and the like. I don't know whether you've had that experience too, or do you ever step back and say, "Oh my," are you weighing that downside against the connectivity and engagement?
Basically, no. And I try to be very clear when I give talks about my science communication that I can do this because I'm in a place of safety as the most privileged uh, identities. I have all of the most privileged identities that one could have, essentially. And so
With
I
me,
get all that I get is the really boring climate denier people poking at you, and it does add up. Like when you have a video go viral, a couple million views and a couple thousand comments, like I have had moments where I'm like, okay, I need to stop looking at this.
right?
So yeah, I'm in a place of privilege for that, and so I hope I can put that to good use and try not to suggest that everybody needs to be on social media, because yeah, many people, yeah, immediately when you shift to women, you will just get the reign of misogyny that is pervasive throughout our culture still.
Right.
And it's, yeah, really sad to see. So just, yeah, wish we could change the dial more quickly on this stuff, but it is pervasive.
Yeah, we ran a workshop at Columbia, and I did a couple of these webcasts on tactics for mitigating harassment, including community. It's sort of building a community approach to your communication sustainability seems to really help. The
Yeah.
organization Pen America, which is a writers organization, has been doing some workshops with scientists too, who are getting becoming communicators. Although, one of the challenges, of course, is it's kind of an emergent frontier still. These are still really new ways to share and shape information. So the learning curve doesn't stop. It's like you're not okay. Now I know how to do this, right? Is that one of the challenges too?
Yeah. And they're constantly changing all of these platforms. And it's almost like you have to backfeed, how to communicate on TikTok into all of the scholarship that does exist on how to communicate science. Um, I have a lot of interaction with that. With Coldex, this Center for Oldest Ice Exploration, we have dedicated funding to study how we communicate, the knowledge transfer component of how we share information between ourselves as
Mm.
scientists, and then also outside to the public, to stakeholders, to other scientists. So I have the pleasure of working as part of the knowledge transfer team, which is led here at the University of Minnesota by Heidi Roop. So yeah, we're lucky. Coldex is a science and technology center funded by the National Science Foundation to find the oldest possible ice core records of past climate in Antarctica. The keystone records that include air bubbles, with every atmospheric constituent preserved, especially carbon dioxide. Um, so the sustained funding and the funding that has resources not only for the science, which we always get funding for the National Science Foundation, but through this we have funding to improve our diversity, equity, inclusion. We have funding to study how we are communicating and whether or not we're hitting the mark on the messages that we are sending out there. I think too often we scientists think we can science our way through anything, which is disrespectful to the discipline of science communication, which is a serious academic discipline, or to the discipline of journalism and science journalism. So we're trying to do better at combining those things, and it's great to have some dedicated support for that.
Can we talk a little bit about on TikTok specifically now? Do you feel there were a few moments when everything worked best, and do you have a sense of what characteristics or traits made that happen?
Oh, for videos and having success?
Yeah, yeah. No, not just like numbers, but engagement or any kinds of outcomes or what has success felt like, and do you have a sense of what the characteristics are that generate a good post there?
Yeah, there are a couple. I mean, it's hard to predict, honestly, sometimes, but I think I try to now, as I've learned, you can have a sequence of posts where you start with something that's a little bit more on the popcorn side of things, like the fascinating sounds that ice makes if you drop it down a pure blue ice borehole, or
Hmm.
taking a trip down the borehole. That the version that our PhD student Austin posted has 20 million views, which is massively viral, because it's fascinating to see. And so he was ready in the field in the Allen Hills, one of the worst places I've worked. I think minus 20 degrees Celsius, blowing 20 knots all the time. Responded with more detailed videos after that massively viral post, because there's an exponential decay on your views, your engagement in social media, but you can still capture people who are going to swipe to the next videos on your account. So I always like that about Twitter, that, you know, I actually really got started in this stuff having a post on Twitter go viral of dropping this piece of ice down a borehole, which makes wacky sounds and people are blown away by it. But you can immediately follow in the thread with links to the actual articles about the science we were doing when we were, you know, yes, we were playing around throwing ice down holes, but we were doing that after doing serious research. So TikTok is a little harder for that. The substance is hard to do without a little bit more time put in. So, you know, like I am not super comfortable seeing my face all over the screen here. Like I didn't do that on Twitter, but TikTok is people engage, you know, so we engage with faces, we engage with humans, and we can
let's listen to here we're listening here
over there. We're doing some digging, getting it ready. You can probably tell we're in Antarctica now. There's the snow machines, and we're here for this stuff, ice with air bubbles inside that contain samples of the atmosphere in the past. At this site, up to 2.7 million years old. And they got little capsules in them, time capsules, little samples of the past atmosphere, all those greenhouse gases, so we can see how Earth's climate system works. Make sure we best understand it, so we can understand climate going forward.
That seems pretty great. Did you kind of rehearse that, or is this something you've said enough that?
And I've gotten pretty good practice. I'm pretty good, you know.
Yeah.
I as much as I hate to sort of be on camera, and I have good support from, you know, from folks like Heidi, who help think about communications. Full disclosure, Heidi is my wife, so we talk about climate and climate communication all the time. God. Everything, yeah. It's at our house is climate change all the time, which can be a little bit of a downer sometimes. My most frustrating thing with TikTok sometimes is I make videos that I think are amazing, you know, take you through the arc of a field trip or of a field season. And I'm like, oh, this is going to do numbers. And then it gets like nothing. You have to sort of go back to the drawing board. But you can see like that one that at sort of the middle left there of my feet, 5.9 million views of me shuffling to bed in my tent. And that's the sort of thing that, you know, has a number of things going for it, but like a ASMR component of just people just experiencing that experience, the weirdness of walking over snow and bare blue ice that's 500,000 years old. You know, look at the environment, and then this is where I'm going to go to bed. And so that's an entry point, and I then followed it up with this is what inside the tent looks like, and tried to catch a few other things while the spotlight is on your account.
And again, on TikTok, you can't do a literal thread. It's just the next post that you do just shows up.
Yeah. And you can do like video replies to comments, which I probably should do.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, I should do more of.
On Instagram, you can, right? See each one of these.
Instagram is the most restrictive. I can't figure out the utility of Instagram. It's like there's a piece of glass in front of your account that just keeps people slightly distant.
I couldn't agree more. Go to your bio link for more information.
Yeah, and then whatever post you did that for 6 months ago is going to not link to the right thing. So another challenge with these is like accessibility. You know, it takes extra time to do. The auto captioning is pretty good with it now. It's better than actually just even a couple months ago. I'm always frustrated too. I do research in British Columbia, the most beautiful ice core site in the world at Mount Waddington, this massive peak. Nobody knows what it is though, and so they don't watch.
Oh, I see. Because it doesn't have that Antarctica. I know that
it's not
place.
Antarctica. Yeah. So still always learning. But you know, the discourse on TikTok is pretty poor.
Yeah.
Pretty nice mountain, huh?
But again, I keep understanding, you know, there seems to be a significant, not just clicking audience, but there's enough true engagement that it makes it worthwhile, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you mentioned you were going to be talking, I believe, to Elena Wood sometime in the future. And so she and I were, another really great supportive step was this annual award now that the Harvard's School of Public Health does in partnership with a climate media outfit called Peak Action, the climate creators to watch. And so Elena and I were part of the inaugural class of like 16 of those creators. And it was like a really nice way that I don't know how intentional they were about it, but like for my university, my department to see, whoa, Peter's on a list that's associated with Harvard. That's the sort of credibility that they lend to me being on TikTok and Instagram that is so valuable. And I hope I conveyed my gratitude for that sort of thing, because it really does feel like you're sticking your neck out being on TikTok. But that, that is changing. I'm actually speaking to somebody from AFP tomorrow about this same thing. So it's wild. It's really great. Great to be able to sort of forge a path, especially, me being the one who's going to get the least harassment for being on these platforms.
This is something I hadn't heard about, and this is what I do day and night, which says a lot of things. It says there is a sort of saturation issue here too. But this is good to see. I'll have to reach out to the public health folks there.
Yeah, it was really great. And I think it was something that the Harvard folks were maybe a little bit skeptical as to what they were getting into. But my understanding is that the reception was far beyond what they expected. And so it's really great. It's really supportive to all of these people who in all likelihood need the support much more than I do, because I do have a day job. I don't make more than sort of trivial amounts of money from views on social media.
Right.
I don't take any ad deals, that sort of thing. I get offers, but it's with the, trying to maintain the credibility as a scientist and educator. It's just sort of trying to keep separate from that if I can.
Right. I was hoping we could spend a little time talking about the science too, and some of the other communicating Arctic change and climate change. I've done several shows here on, I try to look at words and how they get abused and misinterpreted. Started back at the New York Times. So I wrote back in 2015 or 2016, when some papers came out. It was the time when the Antarctica issue was that it was already committed to substantial sea level rise was already baked in. And the word collapse was in the mix. And that ended up leading to the Doomsday Glacier, the Thwaites question. And when you talk to a geologist or glaciologist about collapse, they say, well, wait a minute, we're not talking about like a building falling down. But the public discourse gets so overheated so quickly, including the media play a role. So I don't know how you feel social media and or your relationship with conventional media can attack that problem if you see it as a problem.
Yeah, I do see it as a problem. Absolutely. I mean, like, I'm 100% on the same page as, all of my colleagues researching Thwaites Glacier. I mean, it is one of the most important areas of scientific research and something I am focusing a large part of my career on as well. But, the communicating about it, I think it requires a lot more communication between the scientists and the journalists before there's a big press release. Like, I think of, was it like at AGU December 2021 or whatever, 5 years until the ice shelf was going to collapse. And you can always, quarterback things after the fact, but the public and journalists don't know the difference. And as you all discussed in a previous episode of your show, the difference between sea ice and ice shelf and ice sheet. I mean, maybe people know what sea ice is, but most people have no business knowing what an ice shelf or an ice sheet is. So we need to check ourselves and hopefully, like, through some of these bigger initiatives like the International Thwaites Glacier collaboration and Coldex, which is on par with the same size of research project, to bring people together. So one of the things we're doing for Coldex in May, I don't think we've quite announced it yet, but in sort of at the same time as our Open U.S. Ice Core workshop, which is going to be in Seattle at the University of Washington, the first week or so of May, we're going to have a workshop with science journalists to bring the Ice Core science community and the Coldex community in the same space as those people to hash out some of these issues. And, finding the oldest ice in Antarctica might seem like the complete opposite from Thwaites Glacier, talking about 1 million-year-old ice versus what's going on today and in the future. But both of our projects are looking at the same thing, sensitivity to change, whether it's Thwaites Glacier or Antarctica as a whole or the Earth system as a whole. Everybody, throwing a team of glaciologists onto Thwaites Glacier for the last 5 years or so. I mean, that's essential to understand that system and the processes that affect its sensitivity now and moving forward. And we are looking back with the ice core record, 800,000 years is our perspective right now, direct observations of carbon dioxide, thanks to these little guys, these air bubbles in an Antarctic ice core. And we're hoping to just double that perspective on, how does the motor run? How many examples of natural warming and cooling can we see? And can we make sure our understanding of how CO2 and temperature relate is as rock solid as possible? Because there are changes in the ways the ice ages work when you go back beyond 1 million years. And we don't have a lot of clarity on that without direct observations of CO2 that we can only get from Antarctica and some of the worst places in Antarctica, the high, dry, cold interior of East Antarctica, a place that I've not worked that much before this last season. So, really cool, complementary, big science. And I I'm lucky to have a big role in Coldex as the director for field research and data, which sort of makes me, I guess, the shepherd of all of our projects. We have sort of three projects at a time in the field. We had 21 people besides myself deployed to Antarctica this past season. And I'm sort of, just looking out for everybody. It's, not only a dangerous physical environment, but the cultural environment at our research stations has a lot of sexual harassment issues, gendered issues. And so it's just sort of tightening our team up. And then I sort of acted as the expediter, like maybe like in a restaurant, to just make sure I understand at a high level, PhD level, what our projects are trying to do. And then we have to translate that into logistics, from isotopes to aircraft. And so I sort of operate on all of those scales, which is sort of the most fun part about science, I find, is just the like in Antarctica particularly, the massive logistical effort that has to come together to support the U.S. Antarctic program. And I try to share as directly as possible with any extra energy I have while I'm there. And we had a really cool opportunity this season. I worked with the National Science Foundation and some contacts at SpaceX to get a Starlink internet system for us that we had for the first time at a deep field camp in Antarctica. So again, Austin was able to share live from Antarctica. We did a couple of interviews out there. It was an experimental season, but is a new capability that I think will be incorporated into our communications going forward, which is great, but also scary for us because we're used to being little families of 8 or 10 people in these extreme environments with very little extra capacity. And already, all of a sudden, there's this suggestion. They're like, oh, well, the American Geophysical Union meeting is this week. Couldn't you guys, tune in live from the field? The reaction is immediately, do you know what we're going through right now? Yeah.
That's interesting. It's sort of like there's an over expectation given the media environment we're now for the capacity to be online and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I'm probably, I'm trying with the extra funding and sort of spotlight we have on us with the Coldex project a bit, just because we're a big project, is trying to do a little bit more and push ourselves to try some of these extra things that in a normal project where you're sort of operating more on a shoestring, you would let some of these things fall to the side. So, we're trying to push things forward if we can.
So interesting. I was hoping to show you. You inspired me to. Let me see if I can cue up this clip. I was interviewing Jeremy Shacken, climate scientist. It's like a decade ago.
Oh,
And
wow.
he said something really interesting. I thought I had it queued up. Let me just see if it's queued up because it relates to something I want to ask you. What I want to ask you is, do you have tips for scientists and how to talk with journalists on how to that might avoid some of these misportrayals of things? I guess you'll be doing that in May, but is there one or two that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I try, because I talk about science so often, I guess it's sort of like an empathy to try to put yourself in your audience's perspective as much as possible and to try to get out of your own head. Like, scientists are known for being stuck inside our heads. And so, trying to be aware of that other person's perspective, what their level of knowledge is the obvious starting point, but one that we often don't have time to take into account. Everybody's overcommitted. Scientists often are just accepting these opportunities without having anybody to coach them on how to do things best. So, it's obviously keeping things simple and trying to set out a couple of main points that you want to get across, and maybe a path that you want to get that journalist or that person to follow to come to some conclusion as much as you can. I don't know. Are we still live there. Andy looks a little frozen. Certainly another with live interviews, I guess I'll keep talking in case this is still working, is finding ways to redirect questions to come back to stay focused on the topic that you're interested in.
Sorry,
Still there?
I froze.
Yeah.
Speaking of internet connectivity, I'm in Maine, in a rural area on Starlink, Elon Musk's system. And unlike in Antarctica, we have trees. So every once in a while, the view of the sky for the dish doesn't
Gotcha.
work. And so I'm sorry I froze, but I usually try to warn people ahead of time. And what I say is keep talking.
I think I managed to do it.
Oh, you managed to keep talking.
This is another thing of, right, like when you're speaking to anybody, or especially doing a live interview, is be ready for the unexpected and ready to pivot. It's sort of an improvisational situation.
Yeah, and keep on your message. There's one, let me see if this works. I think it'd be I'd love to get your reaction. So this was many, many, many years ago. Jeremy was a lead author on a big paper about paleo climate, ocean change on long time scales. And at the very end, this was on Skype, way back when Skype was the thing.
Yeah.
And he said something at the end that just struck me.
Before I hang up, can I ask you a question or two?
Yeah, of course.
Just that. He turned the tables. He said, "Hey, can I ask you a question or two?"
A minute.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's you've been doing this for a long time. You've been probably doing this longer than me. So what's your view? How do you see all of this stuff? And yeah.
So
Nice.
You know what I mean? And I try to encourage scientists to consider, when you're being interviewed, consider it a conversation. And when you're teaching, you say, well, what have you taken away from the last 45 minutes? And it can presumably, I think, if then the journalist says, well, collapse, you're talking about blah, blah, blah. You could sort of at least have the chance of putting a framing that might stick with that journalist going forward.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
doesn't solve the problem, because many journalists, if you say something too boring or nuanced, will just interview the next scientist.
That's right.
Who's willing to give them the hotter bite.
Yeah,
but I think it doesn't hurt. I think it doesn't hurt to try.
Yeah, and as scientists, asking those questions, it's almost like it's a data collection opportunity to learn, how journalists have uptaken the information, or students in classrooms too. Yeah.
Well, so I'd like to find out more about that meeting in May. If there's anything I can do to help foster the productive conversations, that'd be great. What was the name? You said it was a grad student who did the one that has 20 million views.
Yeah, Austin Carter.
Is he
Carter?
Does he go by that name on?
Yeah, if you look him up, it's let's see, I have it up here.
Oh, I think I found him.
Austin Carter 642.
Yeah, hold on, because maybe we'll close by playing that clip, and you could just talk a little bit more about it. Hold on one second. Stop screen, present, share screen. Austin Carter. So you say he's had an exponential growth in his following. Do you recall offhand which clip it was here?
Right there in the middle, 20 million views, just above from those green tube ones. Right there.
Oh, with, of course, some nice music. Wow.
So yeah, I thought that was a fantastic job of, he wasn't familiar enough with, or maybe didn't have time to do a voiceover or something, but he still put in those captions that give you the basic story of what we were doing. This is a 96-meter deep borehole drilled right next to where the bottom of the previous borehole was 2.7 million years old. So this is at the Allen Hills, Antarctica, which you might know from being a place where famous meteorites have been found. And that's because the old ice from the interior of the ice sheet flows deep and it comes up and it hits the transantarctic mountains, and it has to flow somewhere to balance the ice flow. So it comes to the surface, and it concentrates meteorites, and it brings million-year-old, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million-year-old ice right to the surface. So we can get it in a matter of weeks, compared to the ultimate goal of Coldex is to spend the latter 5 years of this decade drilling a deep ice core that would be a continuous record from today back 1.5 million years.
Right. Well, I'm really glad that you and that there's a new generation as well are trying to sort of bridge these gaps and get people to pay attention to things that are on time scales we're not used to, but that are incredibly consequential. If we're not thinking about the fate of Antarctica in the right way, we're missing the reality that we're all connected by the ocean, the single ocean, and that when more ice slides into the ocean that had been above sea level will rise. And knowing past patterns through paleoclimatology, I actually created a hashtag years ago, hug a paleoclimatologist. Because as a journalist, I learned so much, not just in this context, but in the history of hurricane patterns, past patterns of wildfire, past patterns of all of these features of the climate system that we care about. If you don't know the frequency of past intensity then you don't know how to characterize what's happening now or what may happen in the future. So hug a paleoclimatologist is certainly the more we can do to get at that, and also to understand the fate of these places, the better. So
yeah,
Peter,
sounds good. I mean, I'm almost at the place in the pandemic where I will accept hugs from anybody.
That's close. Good. So I'm just for fun, I'm going to go back 20 years. 20 years ago, April, next month, I was at the North Pole for 3 days with scientists camped on the sea ice, floating on the Arctic Ocean, 14,000 feet of ocean below us. And an editor, a web editor, Rebecca Demoulin, in one of my sat phone conversations, she said, hey, let's see if we can do like a reader Q&A. This is 2003. And so they put a notice on the Times website, hey, Andrew Revkin is at the North Pole with scientists. Ask some questions. And it was actually an AMA. It was an Ask Me Anything moment. But there was no instantaneous aspect of it. Mm-hmm. She read me the questions on a sat phone. I dictated to her my answers, and she posted them on the website. So this was like 2003. Everyone, welcome to today's discussion. It's really cold, blah, blah, blah. And that just was like, to me, it was it led to a lot of my interest in two-way journalism. You're talking about two-way science, right? Communicating. And everything I had done until that point was me going somewhere, using a notepad, translating what people were saying, writing an article. Maybe there'd be 3 letters to the editor. And this was the first time I was like in a conversation with the readers while I was doing the journalism. And it felt much, it really opened my mind to some different possibilities. And
That's
thank goodness.
Yeah,
sorry.
It's really similar to my feeling of being back in Antarctica for the first time since the pandemic, and for the first time since I became a TikToker, is that now all of a sudden there is the opportunity for that two-way sharing. Internet at McMurdo Station, our biggest research station, is still pretty restricted, and I would have to stay up after everybody went to bed to post a TikTok video, and I couldn't do it on my phone for the data safety issues on a federal internet system.
Sure.
But there is the opportunity of sharing and then seeing what do people want to learn about. And for the most part, they want to see the very human things of like, how do you survive? What does the bathroom look like? But yeah, right. The interaction, I think, is an interesting new frontier as we have better comms in Antarctica. I mean, we really have been stuck in that same iridium configuration for 20 years. It's incredible. So I'm hopeful that we're sort of pushing ahead. The NSF is considering building a fiber cable between New Zealand and Antarctica that I've helped them scope a little bit. So yeah, it's scary. I like that. The isolation of Antarctica is special, and it's necessary to get the work done in the limited amount of time that we have. But then again, there's no reason to restrict ourselves and always be resource scarce down there if we don't have to be.
Yeah. Well, someday I'll get there, right? It was always logistically too hard to get the time, and as a journalist, many of my colleagues have been there, but I just never could quite swing it with my family.
We should talk about this. We can talk about this, Andy.
Oh, sure.
Coldex is going to be a thing for the next 5 or 10 years, hopefully.
Yeah. Although I must say the North Pole, the National Science Foundation funded this North Pole project too, the North Pole Environmental Observatory in University of Washington, and you can't do it anymore.
Yeah,
It's
that's
that
crazy.
the sea ice at that time of year just can't support consistently having encampments or an airfield on the ice and stuff. So I guess I have to look south because I can't go north again. And it was so weird up there. You had this was Russian tourists,
Mhm.
and
Wow.
extreme skiers from England. Yeah, these guys were doing like a marathon around the North Pole. It was a sort of a circus atmosphere. Oh yeah,
Mhm.
Santa Claus was there. He spoke Russian.
Oh boy. There's a little bit
So
of that at South Pole, but I think
yeah.
Will Smith flew in this season.
Oh, he did.
There's
Wow.
he has an earth science program for one of the big channels.
Oh, right, of course. Yeah. Yep. Well, anyway, thank you again for doing this today. And I am glad that people like you are out there on both the geophysical frontiers and communication environment frontiers at the same time.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, for having me. I think it is, as much as these platforms, Twitter and TikTok, are a bit scary and damaged, if we're not there, it's a vacuum of terrible misinformation and disinformation. So happy to do a little bit to change that.
That's a key point. And I make that point about Twitter too. I've written a number of pieces saying don't abandon Twitter.
Mhm.
There's so much good that can be done there. And if you leave the space, it just becomes a noisy and fractious and place that can push us in the wrong directions. Thanks
Yeah.
again. So this is Andy Revkin at the Columbia Climate School with Peter Neff, University of Minnesota, from the Coldex Project, a multi-year NSF-funded project at the down in Antarctica, digging the oldest holes on. And if you're watching this now or you stumble on it later, please share the link with others, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And maybe we'll try to post it on the video on TikTok. So anyway, thanks again. Take care.
Thanks.